Good afternoon and welcome to May 26th Civil Service Commission meeting. May we have roll call, please?
Commissioner Devine. Here. Commissioner Gregorian.
Here.
Commissioner Manukian.
Here.
And for the record, Commissioner Coleman and Gantis are absent.
And we'd like to welcome Commissioner Gregorian. It is a pleasure having you on board.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure, and I'll try to be a very good commissioner like you and like Mr. Devon. I don't know about Roy and John Cantos. He's been here so many years, which I don't even remember when he joined the civil service. I think. Yeah.
Well, welcome
pleasure
aboard.
is mine, and thank you very much, sir.
Welcome aboard. What's next?
Minutes.
What's your pleasure?
Second.
Roll call, please.
What?
Oh, that's right. There you go,
Oh,
sir.
but
That's yours. Second. Roll call.
Commissioner Devine. Yes. Commissioner Manukian.
Yes.
Commissioner Gregorian.
yes.
Abstain.
Oh, I can. I abstain. I'm sorry.
Oral communications.
I don't see any cards. Anybody out here who would like to? Oh, God.
Oh, somebody's late.
I don't have any cards. What's next?
Mr. Chair, there was a letter received from
right.
law firm of Phillips and Rickards. It's from Wendell Phillips, who is a labor representative for the Glendale City Employees Association. The letter was dropped off at our offices, I believe, sometime today, and the individual wrote the letter, asked that this letter be submitted for consideration during the oral communications portion of this meeting.
Okay. What's next?
Excuse
Sorry.
me.
The individual intended to come to the meeting and to read it into the record. We are making it, it's something that they've determined to do unilaterally, so if they've chosen to do that, that's fine. We've distributed copies to the commissioners. Copies of them will be available for the public if they would like to obtain them, so it's available for
But we don't have to read it in the record, correct?
Not.
Okay. Any other questions?
Closed hearings. I personally think it should not be. If somebody wanted to come up. I'll defer.
John.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I agree with Mr. Commissioner Gantis. He's absolutely right.
Okay. Well, at this stage, I'm going to have to refer back to our city attorney, and
The matter was submitted anticipating that it would be read into the record. We advised them that we would not read it into the record, but we would accept it during oral comment. So it was intended by the writer to be submitted during oral comment. If they are choosing to waive their rights, that's up to them.
Correct, and they can waive it here. But I do not think a fax letter constitutes a waiver of that right. If it's part of oral communications, it would be, in my mind, a part of the public record. I think that it involves a personnel matter. By virtue of my understanding of the Brown Act, while it can be waived, it is presumed something that personnel matters are closed unless waived. And certainly when I do public civil service hearings at this place, if they're going to waive it, they get a warning of that and what their rights are, et cetera, or they'll have counsel there. I think a fax letter, I'm sorry, just doesn't arise to me to be something that I think should be put into the public record, and I certainly think it's a commission decision on whether or not it should be accepted as part of oral communications by a fax letter. But I think it should, and that's a decision that should be made by this commission, because while we appreciate Ms. Varpetti, and I always appreciate your legal advice, you know I don't always agree with you, and you don't always agree with me. That doesn't mean that your legal advice isn't appropriate. But I personally, as a civil service commissioner, do not think that this should be accepted. If the person here wanted to do it in oral communication, that's fine. If accepting it puts it into the public, that any member of the public can see this, and I don't think that's appropriate.
Question, I'm sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I have a couple of questions. I certainly concur with Mr. Gaddis, his analysis. However, I'd like to know really two things: the purpose of this, by submitting this, and/or if he had been here in person, what would he gain, or what would be the end result of that? And two, what is the normal process if a person has a concern such as this? What is the process or the path he follows to get this resolved?
I could say that written communications to commissions or to the city council are rare. It isn't something that we would normally get. But in this situation, it's a letter written by attorneys. The client is certainly copied on there. GCEA is copied on there. So it is presumed that the person who's submitting the letter understands the rights that go along with submitting either a written communication or appearing personally and speaking to the commission. If they were here to speak to it during oral comment, it would be just that. You would hear the oral comment, and that would be the extent of it, because the Brown Act wouldn't permit you to discuss it any further.
Right, but what would he gain? What is he gaining by either coming in and speaking orally to us or presenting this in writing? What does this act provide for the attorney and or his client?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Devine, I agree with Ms. Varpetian. We would not be able to take any action on this item since it wasn't agendized.
No, I'm not asking what action. I know we can't take any action on it. I'm just saying, if we choose not to accept this, are we revoking any rights he may have? Are we stepping into a process that could come back and haunt us later on by not accepting this?
Members of the commission, I don't believe we would be denying them any rights. As you can see from the letter, this has to do with essentially a missed deadline, and there was a request made of me to reconsider the fact that the individual addressed in this letter, who is an appellant in a disciplinary case, be given the opportunity to have a hearing. My position as the director of HR was that this deadline was missed, that the individual appellant was properly served in a timely manner, and that closed, in my view, and that was after consultation with the city attorney, that this matter is as far as it needs to go. I think this letter is an effort by the representative of that employee to, I think, give one last effort to obtain such a hearing. And whether this is the appropriate forum or not, oral communications, I can't answer that. But in my view, the request is an inappropriate request, and certainly not something that the commission would be able to vote upon unless, as a consensus, you give me direction to bring this back at some other point in a closed session environment for further discussion. But that wouldn't be my recommendation.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
It seems to me that, again, this is a personnel matter. With all due respect, Mr. Well, I think we've gone beyond oral communications in the discussion of this. I do think what it does give rise to is exactly, with all due respect, Mr. Doyle, what Mr. Doyle has indicated, that it is something that should be calendared as a closed session matter, so that we can discuss exactly what my esteemed colleague brought up, is the process that was gone through, and what, if anything, this commission could do regarding the process, which is basically the subject of this letter. I, again, do not think it should be part of the oral communication. I guess, though, in thinking about it, I'm concerned that the person isn't here and has used it through us. That I would certainly say that he could have come up here and said anything, as Ms. Varpetian and we all know that, absent some really egregious things, we do have a constitution that allows free speech. But, and I'm not saying you didn't say that, Ms. Verpetti. My point is, I don't think it should be in the form of a letter. I think what this does give rise to is a request that that the Civil Service Commission do indeed agendize it. I would recommend that it be agendized for our June 9th meeting under a closed session, because it is a personnel, and that at that time we can consider this particular letter, and that I would recommend that it not be considered as part of oral communications, because frankly, even though it's not on our agenda, I would take it as a request to agendize this issue, but that the contents of the letter not be part of the oral communications, because I don't think that's the appropriate way to address oral communications, particularly involving a personnel matter.
Commissioner Devine? I'm sorry, were you done?
I'm done.
And I again concur with Mr. Gaddis. I believe that that's certainly a fair way of looking at this. However, one additional question, if that process does take place, does this commission have the power to, A, override a decision by the Director of Human Resources in terms of whether or not the deadline was missed or not missed? And do we have the power to act on this and rule one way or the other, whether he missed the deadline or he didn't?
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to interrupt before we get an answer. That's precisely a question that I think is right on, but needs to be discussed in closed session, because, again, we need to know what our rights are, but it's a closed session issue. So I wanted to interrupt you. I think that's the right question. I know you don't need to write it down, Mr. Devine, because you have a photographic memory, but that is the number one question I think needs to be asked in closed session.
Can we agendize this to be in closed session? Can we agendize this item to be discussed further in closed session?
We'll take a look at that and come back to you as to whether or not it would be inappropriate to do it during closed session or during open session.
Or if it's on an open session, then we can discuss.
I think really what we're looking at is whether or not the rules permit it, and if we're talking about the rules specifically, then we would do that during open session.
I will say, members of the commission, that in some instances, the civil service rules do grant the Human Resources Director some flexibility in extending deadlines, particularly in the areas of exam administration appeals. But with regard to disciplinary appeal cases, there is no flexibility that I'm aware of. It was the reason why I denied this request initially. I did not have that authority, and I'm not certain the commission has the authority to violate its own rules.
Yeah.
And again, we're not agendizing it. Again, if it has to be open session, then it's open session. I think we're going beyond oral communications. I think this it would be appropriate as a letter. If the letter were to say, I would request that the Civil Service Commission agendize this issue to discuss it, I don't think, and quite frankly, I would take it as that, and on that basis, I would accept the letter as for that purpose alone, not the contents, and that we then agendize it, whether it's in closed session or open session. We'll leave to Mr. Doyle and or our esteemed counsel, Ms.
Why don't we
Varpetzi.
let the city attorney's office review this and get back to us? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I think you're going to say the same thing I did, that in order to save time, since we know what the question is, ask the city attorney's office to do the research as to whether or not we have the authority to act on this request.
I think
And for
what you
now,
would
not include this item in the oral communication documentation?
Let me ask this question, Ms. Varpetian. Does the law permit a letter as part of oral communications, or are oral communications oral communications?
Well, like I said, it is a very rare thing that we would get a written statement. This is the first that I know of to any of the commissions that I represent, and certainly it's an item that's on the city council agenda. Written communications is an agendized item, but as I understand it, it's reserved specifically for petitions to government and not necessarily this type of communication. So it is an extremely rare form of communication, but it was the intent of the individual to submit the letter to be submitted as part of oral communications. The reason they're not here is they said that they had a scheduling conflict. Otherwise, they would have read the item into the record themselves. And so that's the extent of it. The specific contents of it is, I think what they're looking for is probably a rule amendment on your part, because your rules are pretty specific as to what an appeal deadline, for the deadline for an appeal, and that apparently that wasn't met. And so what you're looking at here is, how do you go about addressing this issue when your rules do not permit it? And I think that's a separate discussion that if you choose to have, you can at some later time. But the question here is, what do you do with this letter? And we don't see a problem with accepting it and attaching it to the your agenda packet and making it as part of the record and making it available for the public and for the commissioners to review, as was intended by the writer.
And the writer is the legal counsel of that individual, correct? I just want to make sure.
Arguably.
Well, that's what it says in
Yeah.
the first line of the letter.
Can we go to the next item, and you come back to us to see where technically we should go with this?
Sure.
Thank you. Next item.
Are we done with oral
Recruitment
communication?
examination status report.
Are we done with oral communication?
Okay, we're going to Mr. Doyle on this?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, this item is a regular part of the commission agenda, which goes through the current recruitment and examination workload status. As you can see for the report, we have all the examination activity conducted by human resources staff at various stages. The individuals responsible for the recruitments are listed, and the various dates for the opening, closing, filing periods, and specific exams are listed. If you have any questions about this report, be happy to try and answer them.
Any questions? I see none. What's next?
Eligible list established.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, this item represents the eligible lists that have been established since our last meeting. As you can see, we have 4 lists that have been established, one of which is an open recruitment list. The other are promotional. As per the list, the total number of applications received for each of those items are listed, as well as those ultimately who made it through the selection process and made it onto the list. Once again, this item is for your review. If you have questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them.
Any questions? I see none. What's next?
Reorganization of commission.
Okay. Not having a full board, is this something that
Perfect.
we're still going, or should we pull it for the next?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I would suggest you proceed with this item, unless it's the judgment of the commission to hold off.
Commissioner Devine?
I move that Mr. Manukian be appointed as chairman of this commission.
I second.
Okay. Vote.
Well, do you want to ask for other nominations?
I'm sorry?
Do you want to ask for other nominations?
He doesn't, but maybe he should.
Any other nominations? I thought we were postponing this item, so I don't, any other nominations? Okay, I see none.
Move that a vote be cast in favor of Sam Manukian as chairman by acclamation.
Commissioner Devine.
Yes.
Commissioner Gregorian.
Oh, yes, definitely.
Commissioner Gantis.
Yes?
Commissioner Manukian.
I guess I'm supposed to abstain.
No, you can vote for yourself.
Oh, you just,
I vote for him. He's a good guy.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I would hereby place in a nomination for the position of vice chairman Art Devine.
Absolutely. Any other nominations?
Move that there be one vote cast by acclamation in favor of Art Devine as vice chairman.
Absolutely.
Commissioner Gregorian.
yes.
Commissioner Gantis.
I guess I'll vote yes.
Manukian.
Absolutely.
Mr. Devine.
Yes.
Thank you, gentlemen.
you.
You know, one of the things that, thank you. I wanted to thank our Commissioner Coleman for, the poor guy's been through a lot, and for all his hard work, and hopefully we'll have him back on our next meeting. Okay, what's next? Congratulations, sir.
Yeah, congratulations. Is there any other third vice or fourth vice for Mr. Gantis?
He's the CEO.
Mr. Gregorian, I know you're new on this commission, but I have been the chairman of vice of this commission for many, many years. I don't need to be
Absolutely.
nominated for that.
Okay.
Revised class specification for approval, integrated waste supervisory and integrated waste collection series.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I'm going to recommend that the commission postpone this item to the next meeting. As you recall, Commissioner Coleman had some specific questions relative to this specification, which he wanted to have addressed. And so we, if it's the pleasure of the board, would like to postpone that to June 9th.
Okay. Everybody okay with that?
Yeah,
All right. What's next?
Revised class specification for approval, Public Works Maintenance Services Administrator.
Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this is a revision of the class specification for the managerial position of Maintenance Services Administrator. This is a very important position within our Public Works Department. This individual essentially oversees all field operations run by the Public Works Department, covering streets, street maintenance, repair, traffic signage, sidewalks, sewers, parkway trees, in addition to the facility maintenance here at City Hall and other city facilities, and our custodial work group as well. There are no major modifications to this specification. This is one that we're just in the process of updating. There is some new language relative to the responsibility for the indigenous tree ordinance, which I believe was formerly handled by Parks Department. Now that falls under this individual. But there are some other minor changes which are underlined, as you can see. But for the most part, this is a revision to update this specification. We have Ms. Akopian from my staff who worked on this specification, and Steve Zern, Director of Public Works, if you have questions or concerns.
Do I hear any questions?
Move to accept.
Second.
Roll call?
Commissioner Gregorian?
Yes.
Commissioner Devine?
Yes.
Commissioner Gantis?
Yes.
Commissioner Manukian?
Yes. What's next?
Mr.
Revised class specification for approval, Police Records Administrator.
It's still good.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this item is once again a revision of an existing specification. This time it's the Police Records Administrator. Again, this is a very, very important civilian position within the Police Department. This specification was last updated in 1996, and we have a series of minor revisions, a lot of it talking about some of the new technologies and some of the new programs that this individual will be overseeing. There's also a reference to the residency requirement that affects all of the employees of the police department, both civilian and sworn. And just general updates of this position. The department does plan to fill this position within, say, the next month or so. And as a preface to that, we wanted to make sure the specification was up to date. So with that, it's presented for your review and approval. We have Russ Kwan from my staff who worked on this specification, as well as Lieutenant Todd Stokes from the police department here, if you have any questions.
Commissioner Gantis.
Mr. Doyle, Mr. Chairman, what does 60 contiguous land miles mean?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Gantis, 60 miles is a radius from basically the Civic Center. And if you were to look on a map and do a radius covering 60 miles and draw a circle, that would essentially cover what the residency requirement is.
And that's precisely my question, because if you wonder why, and I know Mrs. Varpetian will understand this, I had a dispute regarding a deposition that has to be taken within 75 miles of the residence. And the question is it 75 miles as the crow flies or 75 driving miles? And in this case, it was the distance between Valencia and Bakersfield. And as the crow flies, it's 72 miles. Driving miles is 82 miles. So that's why I asked the question. I don't believe I think the word radius needs to be in that. That's my point. Because I don't know the distance between here and Valencia, but my guess is it's darn close in terms of a radius, and driving might be different. So I would suggest that the word radius, I think that's the appropriate way to do it, but I think that needs to be in there. And I'm not sure the word contiguous. I think it needs to be within a radius of 60 miles from the Glendale Civic Center would be the more appropriate way to phrase that.
Lieutenant, how are you?
And I did it because I knew I'd get the lieutenant up here to speak
If I
to
may,
me.
Lieutenant Todd Stokes from the Police
Please join
Department.
us.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, the reason the word contiguous is in there is because if you look at a 60-mile radius from the station that would include Avalon. We wanted to make sure that we didn't have folks residing on Avalon and having to rely on a boat to get to work. So making sure that it was a contiguous land miles versus being
Then
on an
that's
island.
that's what you need to say. The word contiguous means that they're attached to each other. It doesn't necessarily mean it's separated by. That's a very good point. Then it seems to me that it would be, within 60 land miles.
Can we send Commissioner Gantis to Avalon?
Anytime you like.
Are we discriminating against people who live in Avalon?
I know. There you go. There you go.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yes.
Commissioner?
Yes. Question, Mr. Doyle, is this a new position, or because you mentioned a revised classification for approval? Is this a new position, or this position has been there, or we have somebody in that position?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Gregorian, this is a position that's existed for a long time. We've recently had a vacancy in that position, and our intent is to now fill it again. For budgetary reasons, it was not filled for quite some time, but we do have some internal candidates who have been in an acting capacity who we now believe would be eligible, qualified to promote into this position. So I believe that is the proposal here. But
All right. Any other questions? Okay. I guess, do I have a motion to approve with changes?
So
There
moved.
are no changes.
No changes,
It's
okay.
I'm looking reread.
and the word radius is in there.
There.
So moved.
I don't know what.
Okay. Do I have a second?
Second. Yes.
Okay. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Gregorian,
Yes.
Devine,
Yes.
Gantis, Menuchyan.
Yes. What's next?
Revised class specification for approval, administrative intern.
Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this specification is for the part-time hourly position of administrative intern. This is a classification, again, that we're updating for no particular reason other than the fact that it hasn't been updated for a while. We did address some of the new areas that we'd want to make sure got included, including reference to researching via the internet and utilizing spreadsheets and automation and things like that, which many of which didn't exist back in 1992 when we last did this. This again is while it's just an hourly part-time position, it is a very important position to this organization. Many very prominent management level employees started their careers as administrative interns, and it's a great way to really develop young professionals into the public administration field. So anyway, with that, this item is for your approval, and we have Mr. Alex Soto here from my staff who made these revisions. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them.
Any questions? Okay.
Move for approval.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Gregorian?
Yes.
Devine?
Yes.
Gantis? Menuchyan?
Yes. What's next?
Class specification for approval, workers' compensation technician and workers' compensation adjuster series.
Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this is a specification for approval, and these are revisions. Once again, we have really two groups here. One is the workers' compensation technician, and that's a single classification. It's sort of a paraprofessional position, clerical position within the workers' compensation series within Human Resources. And then we have the adjuster series, which has the adjuster 1 and 2, analyst and senior analyst. That one, which has not been updated since 1991. We have some, what I would say, extensive modifications to the series, just to, again, keep this series contemporary and up to date with all the changes that have occurred in state law relative to workers' compensation. There's a lot included in here about the various certifications and licensings that the staff who are in these positions are required to have. If you have any specific questions on this, I'd be happy to try and answer them. Ms. Unanian from my staff worked on this specification. Actually, I'll say Ms. Martin from my staff did the work, but since she's off on maternity leave, Ms. Unanian is filling in for her, but she's here to answer any questions. We also have Cheryl Scott, who is our workers' comp administrator here, to answer questions you may have as well. So.
Any questions? Please.
Pretty challenging. So on that basis, I'll make a motion to approve those adjustments.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Gregorian?
Yes.
Devine?
Yes.
Gantis?
Yes.
Menuchyan?
Yes. What's next?
Public hearing, request to suspend competition and grant appointment by recognized attainment to 2 power plant series positions.
Okay.
Mr. Doyle, is this another item that's being pulled?
Yes, sir. We will have to pull this. This is an item that requires 5 affirmative votes. The employees were notified this morning that we would be without a full commission. So this item must be brought back at our next meeting. So hopefully we will have a full commission for that meeting.
Now, if we don't, should we, at that point, should we consider a special meeting?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I spoke with former Chair Coleman this morning, and he said he intends to be there for our next meeting. He said if not, then we will entertain the special meeting.
Okay, so be it.
Just one question. Are we still okay with these employees? I know this has been...
We are still okay. We are getting up against the deadline. With essentially the agreement was reached with the firm that formerly ran this power plant at the landfill. I believe the decision was the agreement called for the retention of these employees through, I believe, January 1st, and then at that point, hopefully they would transition to city employees, which is what we're proposing here. So
January 1 of which year?
I'm sorry. Did I say January 1?
Yeah.
I meant July 1st.
July.
Thank you.
Apologies.
Okay. What's next?
Agenda forecast.
Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, we'll have a full agenda for June 9th, which would be our next meeting. The preceding item on recognized attainment will be brought back. The integrated waste management series will be brought back, as well as a specification for new classifications involving the DNA lab will be brought back on the 9th. And this is a very important project which our police department is working on. We obtained some federal funding to operate a DNA lab, and as it always goes with the attainment of federal monies is a time frame for getting the lab together, getting it staffed, and what we hope to do very quickly is recruit for the person to essentially oversee the construction of that lab. That would be a new classification, thus requiring a specification. So we're working with Mr. Kwan and the other members of the police department to make that occur at the next meeting.
That's something that I've been involved with a little bit with Captain Leif Nicholas, and I think I'm very excited for that. It's when we're done achieving that, I think it's going to be very beneficial to the city and to the police department. So I congratulate them on making that happen, and it's a very interesting process.
Not done yet.
Almost there. Okay. Now, is this where we should talk about the issue of that letter?
Mr. Chairman, if I may,
Please.
I still have reservations about the letter. I've reread it about 3 times. I have real reservations about it. Coming in as part of oral communications. May I just inquire of Ms. Var, where did we get this? How was this letter transmitted to this commission?
I
It's
actually have
facts to whom?
First, I have a question about why we're taking up that item at this point on the agenda.
Because we said we'd take it up later, number one, and number two, whether we're going to agendize the item requested at a later time. This is agenda forecast.
I see. Okay. It was delivered to Mr. Doyle.
Yeah, and the reason we're talking about now, we want to see if we are going to actually agendize this to go over it in closed session. I'm assuming this is...
Well, they said they're open.
Okay.
I believe, Mr. Chairman, that I'm reluctantly going to allow this. It appears to be just what it is, a request that it be reconsidered, and I would request that it be agendized. If it's appropriate in closed session or open session, that I'll leave to the city attorney. I think it is a personnel matter, but again, it's up to the city attorney. If it becomes a rules issue, that's what they would determine. But I would request it be agendized for June 9th.
Okay.
And I would agree with that, and I would also ask that for that meeting that the city attorney provide a report indicating the recourse a person in this situation has, legal recourse as established by the charter or our rules.
And our authority also.
Right. So that we can be briefed on that before we get into the decision-making process.
So June 9th is what? Okay, perfect. Any other comments? Any other questions?
I just want to clarify, I will collaborate with the city attorney on, and right now we need to determine whether this would be an open item or a closed session item. And we'll do some research and see what the appropriate method for bringing this back would be on the 9th. That's okay with the commission.
Absolutely. Okay, any other comments? What's next?
Reports and information, past due employee performance evaluation from May 12, 2010.
Commissioner Devine, you want to tackle this?
All right. For no past dues, we have the city manager's office, city treasurer's office, community redevelopment and housing, finance department, fire department, Glendale Water and Power, human resources, police, and public works. And I would say that's an excellent record. On first notice, we have the city clerk's office and planning department, community service and parks, information services, and library. So I would say, all in all, the employee evaluations are coming in very, very well, and I see no problems at this point.
Fantastic. What's next?
Civil Service Commission interstaff comments.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I've known Mr. Gregorian for many years. I've liked him for many years, and I am very pleased that he's a member of our commission.
Absolutely. I agree.
And I will echo those thoughts also.
Absolutely.
Chair, may I say something?
Yes, please.
I'm kind of in shock because according to Mr. Gantes, this commission takes lots of time, 40 minutes. I mean, this is piece of cake.
Oh, wait around. Wait around. You're going to have some
Mr.
fun nights.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Gregorian.
Hold it, relax.
So,
Mr. Gregorian, you are definitely misrepresenting to the public. This is like watching the tip of an iceberg of this.
Thinking iceberg.
We'll be glad to give you all the work you can handle. Trust me.
that's no problem. Coming from GWP, this is nothing because whatever we did over there, this is.
I also concur. Mr. Gregorian's an excellent asset on this commission, and also, once again, I wanted to thank Albert for all the years of dedication and hard work that he's put into
I
this
second that, yeah.
to this commission. We've learned a lot from him, and we will continue learning from him. And do I have a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Before
yes.
before we do that, I just wanted to announce to you someone very special from my staff who had a baby last week, Amy Martin. May 18th, 6 pounds, 15 ounces. Sophia Natalie Martin was born.
Congratulations.
Mother and
Congratulations.
baby are doing well.
How's the dad doing?
He's okay.
They never ask about the dad.
That's
I
right.
swear.
I decided I would ask about the dad.
Absolutely.
But I'm also happy for Amy.
I'm sure she's watching this.
Oh, she better get a new hobby. Why is she watching? Okay. Move to adjourn? Do I have?
Move to adjourn.
Thank you.
Thank you.